welcome again to the Theology Pugcast. It's great to have you with us, and we are in Connecticut, and we are in each other's physical presence. There's proximity here. We're not dealing with virtual reality. We're not trying to pretend that we're in the same room in a Zoom format, like Brady Bunch or something like that. We're actually here with each other, and we're enjoying beer, and we've got some friends with us. Anyway, you're with us, and we're glad for that. I'm C.R. Wiley. I am a pastor in the Pacific Northwest. I pastor a church in Vancouver, Washington, the Presbyterian Church, or I should say Westminster Presbyterian Church in Vancouver. And if you find yourself out there and you're looking for a place to worship, we'd love to have you with us. Anyway, I've written a number of things, and I've spoken in a number of places, and that's enough about me. Tom, how about you?
Tom Price, systematic theologian and Christian ethicist. I teach both Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and other places. And I just wanted to say we have good friend John and Lynn is with us today.
Yep, and Dave.
And Dave,
yeah,
that's right.
That's right. So we've got some friends to overhear what we're saying and confirm that we were actually physically here today and not virtually together. But Glenn, how about you?
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I am currently a professor of early modern European history at Central Connecticut State University and a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview.
That's great. And by the way, I think that when this show comes out, I will be preparing to be in Norman, Oklahoma. Norman, Oklahoma, where I'm going to be speaking at the Timber Creek Fellowship on a Saturday morning. And I believe the date, if I remember correctly, is April 17th. I think that's a Saturday. Anyway.
When you're there,
yeah.
If you can get to the university, you really need to check out the architecture on the library.
Okay. Is it going to appall me or enchant me?
I prefer the word bemuse. Now, it's been a long time since I've been there. I mean, actually, more decades than I'd like to admit. But when I was there, they had this beautiful American Gothic library building, and they decided they needed more room on it. So they attached to the back of it a square brick box to add to the stacks. And it's a truly amazing example of utilitarianism destroying architecture.
So you have a juxtaposition. You've got something that's more classical in nature, and then you have this box.
Yep.
Okay. I've seen that sort of thing sort of again and again in different parts of the world. But anyway, I know what you're getting at. Well, if I can check it out, I will. I may not have the time. They're actually flying me in on Friday afternoon. I'm flying back on Saturday afternoon. So I'm just there to do the event and
look out the window of the airplane.
That's right. That's right. So I'll technically be there, but and I'll be able to say I was in Oklahoma City and I was in Norman, Oklahoma, but that's about all I'll be able to say. And of course I'll be at the church.
The only time I've been in Oklahoma is when I was on my way to Austin, Texas, and they had to do a detour.
So you were going through to get to Texas, which probably is something that folks in Oklahoma would be appalled at.
They would, but I did get to see their terrain from a plane view, so that's my only experience, sadly.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I've not been to Oklahoma, and I'm glad to be going there, and I'm honored to have been asked to speak. Anyway, it's my day here on the Pugcast, and so it's my turn, as we all know, to introduce the subject, and I want to talk about the hermeneutic of suspicion. The hermeneutic.
Now, why do you want to do that?
Because I'm a very suspicious person.
What's behind all that suspicion?
That's right, that's right. Well, you know where I'm going with this. Paul Ricouer, the French philosopher and thinker, is the person who coined the term, the hermeneutic of suspicion. And what he was getting at, he's an interesting fellow. He was born into a Huguenot family, and he went from being kind of a target during the rebellions and the protests of '68 to kind of a national hero intellectually in France when he was older, and later he died and was celebrated So it ends well for him. But the term hermeneutical suspicion, what he's getting at is he said people in our time read with a hermeneutic that is seeking to uncover the true motives of the person who wrote what you're reading, because there's always something kind of going on beneath the surface. So you need to be suspicious. What's stated can't be trusted. Mm-hmm. You've got to look for the true motives beneath the surface. So he identified three figures as responsible for the hermeneutic of suspicion, or maybe another way of putting it is, embodiments of the hermeneutic of suspicion. Mm-hmm. One is Freud.
Yeah.
Another is Marx, and the third is Nietzsche.
Yeah.
So they're all 19th century. Transitioning into the 20th century. They're figures that I think that many people, when they think about, when would be a good time to be alive, when would be a good time to sort of, live, in the past, wouldn't the Victorian era be that time that you'd want to live in? I mean, you got Dickens, you got, the Industrial Revolution, you still have a very strong sort of cultural sort of ethos that's informed by Christianity. So you've got all these things,
Anybody who has read Dickens would not want to go back and live in that period.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe we should
Bleak House.
But I do think that there are a lot of people who have a very romantic connection to that time. The literature is attractive. And then there are personages, literary persona who we think about, like Sherlock Holmes, So anyway, but it's during that period of time that we have these major figures who are champions of suspicion. Now, when we think about Freud, well, Freud is the one who championed the idea of the unconscious, right? So the consciousness is this sort of layer that is, that you're aware of, but it's covering this sort of deep and kind of powerful and seething kind of sort of layer beneath the surface that is bubbling with the id, sexual and desire, and
you could almost say, I mean, if you think about it, sort of the things we've talked about on the show it's this kind of irrational level of desire.
Right.
It's it's voluntarism down in the subconscious.
Yeah. So you've got the sex drive, but you also have the death drive. Yeah. Both of these things are present. You've heard the term Freudian slip. Freudian slip is basically a slip that brings to the surface some, these drives or these things that are beneath the surface. Now, the superego is that part of your personality or your, sort of mental life that is there to represent social standards and suppress these drives, right? Hopefully, sort of redirecting them in positive ways. An example of what Freud would be getting at with this regard to this is sports. So it's sports, competitive sport like rugby or whatever, is the death drive sublimated and redirected in ways that are socially useful and salutary. But what that means is that when we think about sport, think about rugby or football or even baseball or golf, there's something ugly there that's underneath the surface, and that's the desire to dominate and to kill. Like you see in the animal kingdom, right? So that is what Freud contributes to the way we think and why we ought to, and that's his suggestion, or actually his teaching on why we ought to be suspicious.
And so, yeah, what otherwise would look like claimed, virtuous acts are really, under the surface, very disgusting kind of things.
That's right.
They're just tempered, they're directed or limited.
Yeah, Schopenhauer is another interesting figure in this whole discussion, because Schopenhauer talks about will, not will to power, but just will, raw will. And, I remember reading something that Schopenhauer said, and it was this: why do we have the urge to grin when we hear that someone has died? That's a fascinating observation, but that's what he's getting at. There's some kind of primal, unconscious, subconscious, preconscious, irrational urge that he calls will that's at work. And we're ashamed of that, and we suppress it. But it has a way of working itself out and bubbling up in all sorts of places. You remember the film Forbidden Planet?
I don't think I remember it.
Yeah. Forbidden Planet was Leslie Nielsen was in Forbidden Planet before he did the Airplane franchise. He played a serious role in Forbidden Planet, and in Forbidden Planet, there's this monster who keeps assaulting this spacecraft from Earth that's landed to do some. I don't know exactly what they're there for, but Leslie Nielsen is the commander of the ship. But there is this sort of mad scientist who's there, who's found this alien technology. And he's got a beautiful daughter, of course. And what happens is in the course of the film, there's this monster that keeps attacking the ship, this invisible monster, this energy force. Well, over the course of the film, it's revealed that it's actually the id of the professor, the father of the beautiful daughter, whose id, or sort of irrational, monstrous, sort of subconscious self, is being energized and instantiated in this energy being that's attacking the ship. Why? Because he wants to protect his daughter, jealously possess his daughter, and keep his daughter from all those good-looking guys on the spaceship. So anyway, that was they referred to it as the monsters from the id, the monsters from the id. So that's one of the proponents of the hermeneutic of suspicion. So Freud would say you don't trust what people say, you don't trust reason. What you do is you use reason to uncover these irrational forces that are working in a person's life. So that's the first. Now the second is Marx. So Marx maintained that a society, its culture, its institutions that operate on the surface actually are supported by the means of production, sort of the power sort of arrangements within a society that we see in the means of production with regard to capitalism, for example. So you've got these people who are self-interested. They're people who are pursuing their economic interests, and they're using other people to do that. But there are a series of institutions in place to kind of keep people sort of numb, drugged, in an opiate state. Keep them unaware of this exploitation that's going on.
Yeah, that's interesting because here you go again. It's irrational forces, right? They're not governed by intelligibility. They're material. They're economic, largely, and power.
Right.
And then but you also have a strange kind of attempt at a realism in the sense that the human being that is in a particular state of every human state of consciousness and its understanding of the world is determined by, it's almost a mirror reflection of its place within that set of determining forces.
Yeah, so for some strange reason, a person is able to uncover what is really going on.
Only Marx. You see, that's real freedom. There's your prophet, right?
There, the prophet of freedom, Karl Marx. So, a very nasty person who was very, I think, unsavory. And
mainly because of his economics, sir.
But, so, you can't really take anything at face value. For example, religion. So the religion in question here is Christianity. So the idea being that, well, Christianity, according to Marx, is sort of working to take your mind off of these material concerns and redirect your attention toward pie in the sky, by and by.
Well, interestingly, here's a therapeutic understanding of Christianity, right? It is a certain kind of therapy that allows you to cope with
Right.
your exploitation and your lot in life. It's kind of like alcohol. You know?
Right. Well, but that's his point. It's an opiate.
Yeah.
It's a kind of drug that doesn't actually deal with the real problem. What you ought to do is, instead of taking recourse to religion, you ought to deal directly with the problem.
And religion in his view, has a very static, and it defends created order sometimes, in his view, in such a way that it doesn't transform it.
Right.
So it just, the status quo. It keeps its lot.
Right. And that's because in this view, culture and ideas are kind of ephemeral. They sort of like are a mist that emerges from the ground of reality, and reality is exclusively material.
Yeah.
And it's power and matter that matter, And if we can rearrange power structures, that will necessarily result in a kind of transformation of consciousness.
Yeah.
Our way of thinking and our way and the arts and the other sort of products, at least as Marx puts it, all the products of the power arrangements will be altered, and something better will be the result.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
To apply Freud to Marx for a moment, Marx's father moved the family to another city. They were Jewish.
Right.
And he converted to Lutheranism because it would be good for business.
Yeah.
And that may help explain some of Marx's feelings about religion.
Yeah.
Along with that, he was a member originally of a group known as the Young Hegelians.
Yes.
This was a group of people who were followers of Hegel but rejected, in particular, his idea that Prussia at the time was the perfect example of freedom. And they decided that to undermine Prussia, the way you would do it was go after religion.
Okay.
Because Lutheranism was so embedded in Prussian national identity and ideology that if you can undermine that, you can undermine Prussia.
Yeah.
So Marx is coming out of both of these backgrounds as he's approaching religion.
Yeah,
but it is interesting what you just say, because this may be their positive contribution, is that we oftentimes won't address always head on their claims, because we understand the conditioning of their, the genetic fallacy, if you will. Their ideas are reducible to their set of psychological and formative traditions. There is a genuine place for that. I think there is. I mean, they, I think, unmasked it. But I do think sometimes we leave it there, all of us. And I think classic Christianity wouldn't. But I think we're going there, so I'm not going to say more.
Yeah, I think we are going there. The third master of suspicion, or proponent of the hermeneutic of suspicion, is Nietzsche. So Nietzsche essentially is concerned, again, with power, right? And it's the will to power that is the real force underlying things. And there's I think, a parallel here, or a common sort of structure in terms of the way of looking at things that we see with Freud and with Marx. What you have on the surface is not the story. You need to kind of dig beneath the surface and unearth what's really motivating people to do what they're doing. And people are seeking power, and power is something that you seek for its own sake. It's not something that you seek for some higher good. It's something that is really the summum bonum. I mean, it's all there is. And so there's a kind of satisfaction and pleasure that one enjoys when one has power, right?
And this, I mean, Michael Gillespie has told this story a lot. I've quoted him a lot, but this is really the way in which when there's a move away from classic Christian view of God to God as sheer power. Humans made in the image of God as sheer power. This is really one of the varieties of that expression.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And this may be a theological reduction, but I do think that's what's driving this. Why else would he be attracted to that as what it means to fundamentally be human or creaturely? Because power somehow has taken on this ability, whether it's self-realization or agency or whatever it is. And this seems to be, over and over again, the attraction, especially in the West, to what is ultimate is this power.
Yeah. And of course, in the case of Nietzsche, as we see with Marx and Freud, you have to unmask, things. You have to sort of look beneath the surface. You have to be suspicious.
Yeah.
See what's really going on.
So truth is nothing more than a kind of an army of metaphors,
right?
To cloak your power and your privileges.
That's the way Marx, Nietzsche put it.
Yeah.
At the risk of landing back in the genetic fallacy, what we're looking at with all of these guys, as well as with a whole host of others. You can look at Kierkegaard, you can look at Bergson, you can look at Dostoevsky. All of these guys are reacting against post-Enlightenment rationalism and are rediscovering something that Christians have known for a long time, that the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked, who can understand it?
Right. Yeah, the thing that got me thinking along these lines is I just finished reading a treatment of Foucault in First Things. There's a female scholar, philosopher, I think. I don't have it handy, but she did a really nice job of handling Foucault and sort of his outlook. But that's what Foucault is up to as well. I mean, he's a Marxist, and but what you have, I think, in each of these examples is something I think is puzzling. The illusion is more attractive than the reality. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, when everything is revealed to be nothing more than the death drive or the sex drive or the will to power or the power structures of the economy, you're kind of, is that really it? Is that all there is to it?
Yeah.
I mean, are we that base? Are we that bad? I mean, is there nothing beautiful? Is there nothing good? Is there nothing true? Is there nothing worth living for?
Yeah, it's just all the epiphenomena of one's being conditioned.
And this is what C.S. Lewis marvelously critiqued in The Silver Chair in the Chronicles of Narnia. I don't know if you recall. There they are with, I think it's the Green Witch. They're underneath the surface of Narnia, and she's describing, or she's dismissing, I should say, their memory of the sun. Recall? And what she says is, what you're talking about is merely a light. This is a very Freudian approach. You're just describing a light, and you're sort of projecting it into the sky with this idea that this would be a comforting, and this would be a comfort to think that there is this luminous body in the heavens. All it really is just something in your head. And then, is it puddle glum? Is it puddle gum or puddle glum? Puddle glum. So
people used to say that he was my role model.
Kind of like Eeyore. So anyway, so Puddle Glum says, well, I can say this. Our dream is better than your reality, and I'll take my dream. But I think what Puddle Glum is really saying is that it wouldn't be as attractive as it is, this dream, if there wasn't something to it. And, there really is more. And another time that C.S. Lewis does something similar to this is in The Pilgrim's Regress. So in The Pilgrim's Regress, you have Pilgrim, and he's traveling down this road, and you veer to the north, and you end up in these harsh, sort of rationally sort of structured, wastelands. And that's where Nazis and communists live. It's in those places. But there's this scene where there's this giant. And if I recall correctly, there's a kind of a X-ray effect that reason is able to produce to show the inner workings of the body of the giant. And the point that I think Lewis is making, if I'm remembering the scene correctly, is that just because you know the sort of inner workings of a thing doesn't really mean you understand the thing, the point of the thing. And I think Tolkien is addressing the same thing when he's, working with the character of Saruman, and Saruman's talking about, breaking, light in order to demonstrate the spectrum, and then Gandalf says, well, then it's not white any longer. In other words, white in this illustration is a thing that's worth enjoying and recognizing for its own sake. Just because you break it apart doesn't mean you genuinely understand it.
Whoever breaks a thing in order to understand it has left the path of wisdom.
Yeah, that's a great line, and in that line, Tolkien is, I think, critiquing the Cartesian approach, and much of the modern approach to knowledge is in terms of reduction.
Well, that's interesting because one of the classic way of doing this is the first principles. Lewis is in the tradition of first principles. The modern world is breaking it down into its quantifiable.
Yes, quantifiable versus quantitative.
That's right. And
qualitative.
That's right. And so the qualitative, classically in Christianity, for example, you want the ultimate reality to be the light that shines on all the particulars. It doesn't mean the particulars are reducible to the ultimate, because as Christianity, especially not. But you return to first principle because they're the irreducible something from which, to which, and through which all things, or to which all things are. And so, for example, today we would look at a text, and then we would look at it, we'd try to break it down into something contingent, its historical particulars. But Scripture, when it talks about these things, tells you that's one layer of the picture, and it's an important layer. But that layer is not the principle from which you understand the full meaning, because it itself is dependent and creaturely. So that all the particulars of history, even together, do not create the source from which, the being source, and therefore the meaning source from which all of the particulars are read. So when you go back to first principles, you're going to the ultimate reality that determines, defines, and orders everything. So to understand what something is that is creaturely, you have to understand upon which it depends, what defines and determines it, what form it has, and to what end it has. But this is very different. This is merely reducing it to its barest components and then leaving it there. There's no form, there's no finality, there's no from which, to which, through which, and to which anything is.
And I think that's one of the reasons why these ways of thinking about things have proven to be so popular in our time, because it's a foregone conclusion for many people there are no formal or final causes. They just don't even think in those terms. But I think there is a way back. I don't mean to imply that this is the only way back, but I would like to. I'm suggesting that it is one of the ways back, and it's a different hermeneutic. So you have a hermeneutic of suspicion, which doesn't take anything at face value and looks for sort of underlying motives. But what that does, I think, is it dehumanizes the person who's writing. That whatever you're reading, you're no longer reading something written by a person. You're looking for some malintent or some deceptive practice or.
And the interesting thing is, it's always read mal or deceptive.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? What if those, I'm just for the sake of argument, not to be skeptical here, but just, for the sake of argument, what if those forces actually aren't as sinister as they think?
Yeah.
What if they actually towards, like Darwin said, towards life and survival?
Yeah.
Why is that negative? I don't agree with that, but I'm just saying they always read it as if it's some like with Descartes, something that needs to be managed and controlled.
Well, I think it goes back to the garden. I think that, we have in Scripture the very first example of the hermeneutic of suspicion. Did God really say, or why, the reason why he wants you to, stay away from this tree and not eat this fruit is because he doesn't want you to be like him. So the hermeneutic of suspicion is not something invented in the 19th century. It's been with us for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But
it's very primitive, if you want to be reductionist.
but let me move on to the thing I'm suggesting here. So I suggest a hermeneutic of sympathy. Let's begin with the assumption. I think it's more than an assumption. Let's begin with the truth that we're reading something written by a human being.
Which
profound thought.
Yeah, well, it is, but it creates a fuller picture here. Because when that is the case, and see, this is sometimes, I mean, look, I understand John Calvin has something that can be as, and St. Augustine can be as suspicious as anything else, right? The heart is an idol maker, and it is.
Sure.
This is very true, but neither Augustine nor Calvin meant by that there was nothing about the human being in the common grace of God that also could know some truths, confess some realities, and have certain kinds of human genuineness.
Well, and that's right, but they also believed that they were human beings.
That's right.
Tinctured with sin, touched by sin.
That's right.
And that's one of the things that you don't see with Freud or Marx or Nietzsche. Nothing that they write is confessional.
Yeah.
Nothing that they write says, you know what, I struggle with all this stuff too, and I'm trying to get over it. No, what they assume is a kind of purity of intent on their own part. So they are judging the rest of humanity.
Yeah, the self-righteousness. And,
yeah. But let me step back to my hermeneutic of sympathy. So if I recognize that I'm reading something written by a human being who's as mixed a bag as I am, I have my good days, I have my bad days, I have good motives, I have bad motives, okay? Now, because I have bad motives, I can be suspicious of the motives of other people, but that does not exonerate me. It just brings to the surface the fact that human beings are fallen, and we have to be aware that we fall short of our highest ideals. But we still have ideals. We still long for things that are true and good and beautiful. Now, if I'm reading someone whose work has actually survived down the centuries or through the centuries and has actually arrived at my desk, that's in some sense an endorsement by many people, and that endorsement is, there's something worthwhile for you to know that this person said or wrote, and you ought to read it. So I've got two reasons to be sympathetic. One is that I'm reading something written by a human being. The second is that other human beings have taken the trouble to preserve what this person has read or written and pass it down to me. Now, we all know there are tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of things that we write that will never make it past tomorrow.
Yeah.
They're just not that great. They're not worthwhile.
Yeah.
But if something has endured, that's something to consider when we read. So those two things in my mind help me read sympathetically.
I would add a third.
Okay.
The golden rule.
Yeah.
If you follow what Jesus is saying there, you should not assume bad motives or hidden agendas or things like that from other people if you don't want them to assume those things about you.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I'm going to add another. Coming from Karl Barth, of all people. He was talking in particular about church fathers, but this could be applied to anyone in particular, is honor your father and mother.
Yes.
Because it doesn't matter who your immediate parents are, your father and mother go all the way back.
Yes.
And so there is something in their works, every single one of them, that has a claim on you just because you're the byproduct now of everything that went before you.
And I think that actually kind of gets to what I think is the malintent of the hermeneutic of suspicion.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to throw off the claims and the sort of the constraints that we feel when we recognize our debts.
Yeah.
We say, well, I mean, if this person has contributed to my welfare, I really owe them some kind of acknowledgement and some gratitude. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's it. This in any kind of way in which those claims could have something that determines me in any way that's inconsistent with the way I want to define myself.
Yeah.
And see, that's one of the gifts, I think, of ancient writers and the like, is that they bring into me a set of claims that, yes, I don't always, I mean, you have to weigh them up against the final truth scripture and
Sure.
your participation in the community of faith and all of that. But what you're not doing is ignoring them or just saying, oh, that they're irrelevant or they have nothing to say. It's the exact opposite. They have something to say because of who they are and what claim they do have on me. And there is this resistance to anything that is going to form me.
Right. Yeah. And what prompted my thinking along this lines is I conducted a seminar on Xenophon's Oikonomikos, which is a great work from antiquity written in the 4th century. Most scholars believe. Socratic dialogue in which Socrates has two interlocutors, one of whom is a failed or failing, head of house, and another who's a successful head of house. Now, both of these are men, and in the course of the dialogue, Socrates is trying to understand, what is it about the guy who's succeeding that contributes to his success. Now, Foucault actually wrote a commentary on Oikonomikos. Now, what do you think Foucault was obsessed with? Power relations, biopolitics, all that kind of stuff. He was not at all interested in what makes a household function. That was not why he was reading the book or reading the dialogue. He was reading the dialogue with an agenda, and the agenda was to uncover the sinister sort of agenda that ancient men in Athens, were sort of pursuing at the expense of other people.
To his credit, he did at least try to read it.
Well, that's right. He actually
that's not sympathetic.
Yeah, he didn't read it sympathetic. And I think the reason why Foucault didn't read it sympathetic, a couple of things. He's a homosexual.
Yeah.
He's not.
And from what I'm reading in more recent literature, he was also predatory towards minors.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of recent work came out on that.
Okay, well, I'm not surprised.
And though, to his credit, besides all that distorting vision, he actually was obsessed with reading the Church Fathers.
Well, yeah, he actually had some positive things to say about the Fathers.
Yeah.
But anyway, but as I've said before, I think in our last show, in fact, when you're riding, across America in a Ryder, moving van, all you can see are other Ryder moving vans because you're so aware of the fact that you're driving a Ryder moving van. So you miss a lot of things that are going on, but you're focused on one thing. So he's focused on one thing. He's focused on the biopolitics, sort of the political, the personal is political, the household, and as a polity, he's completely wrapped up in that, and he's missing just some very basic, I think, things like survival and actually being able to get things done and
flourishing and
that's right, it's just
and
basic stuff.
The unfolding of true natures and kinds and ends. I mean,
Right.
that's what he disturbing human being, but to his credit, he worried about those things.
Yeah.
He obsessed about those things, and I think he was trying. You talk about a seared conscience. He was trying to rid himself of those things, but he was unable. He kept returning to.
Well, I think that his approach blinded him to some things that are actually, I think, very marvelous about Xenophon's dialogue.
Yeah.
If you actually read it, you can't come away from reading the dialogue with some of the prejudices that we possess with regard to the the practice of patriarchy in the past. So, in the dialogue, the wife of Isomachus, I think is his name. Isomachus is the is the head of house whose household is successful. And what he tells Socrates in the course of the dialogue is, these are the things that I've done and I continue to do to make my household successful. And what you learn is that he treats his wife very humanely. He trusts her with a great deal of power in the household. He relies upon her wisdom. He informs her that there may come a day when she is held in higher regard than he is because of the way in which she has helped the household prosper. He describes his practice of sharing the profits with his servants, with his slaves, in order to help them have a sense of shared ownership in the property. In other words, there are things throughout the course of the dialogue that people like Foucault are not looking for.
Well, that's Ellis's point with literature. There's a whole tradition here of literature and ideas and writings that are doing this stuff that are completely being ignored.
But that's my point, and the reason it's being ignored is we don't sympathize.
Yeah. We need straw men to affirm ourselves rather than be challenged and confront reality.
Yeah, if we read Xenophon sympathetically, if we read Aristotle sympathetically, we would see things. For example, now famously, Aristotle talks about people who are natural slaves. Now, what he's saying is not what modern people think he's saying when they hear the word natural, because when we think of the word natural, we think of genetics, right? We think about laws of nature that are irrefutable and can't be changed. That's not the way Aristotle thought. Aristotle was essentially addressing the reality on the ground. There are some people who simply don't know what to do, and they need to be told. That's natural. In other words, kind of the reality on the ground. But also, if you read Aristotle's treatment of slavery sympathetically, you can see he was uncomfortable with slavery. And one of the reasons why we know he was uncomfortable with slavery is because he proposes a solution to slavery that is missed by many readers.
Except for Thomas Aquinas, I might say, who was opposed to it anyway.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Aristotle said is, if we could create automata, in other words, robots or machines, to do certain things, we wouldn't need slaves. And he actually uses Hephaestus and Icarus, so the tripods of Icarus. He says, if we could ever come up with something that was actually worked like the tripods, I think it's Icarus, maybe he actually notes both. I think there are two different examples from the lore or mythology that Aristotle was acquainted with that he uses to demonstrate why slavery is not necessary if certain conditions were different. So he's entertaining even then, and he raises the question: is slavery something? In other words, it was a subject of conversation. He wouldn't have raised the question: is slavery necessary or natural? If there was no discomfort, if you get my point.
Yeah.
But you won't pick that up. You won't note that if you read Aristotle with sort of a hostile frame of mind, looking for hidden agenda.
Yeah, the anachronism, I think that's the other thing, is hermeneutic suspicion is just sheer anachronism.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just reading what you consider to be suspicious onto the whole past. I mean, you wouldn't have even arisen to the place you are if it wasn't for the past that gave rise to you.
Right,
I mean,
that's
really,
right.
If we want to play that game,
That's right. Say
we want to be
thank you.
suspicious.
Right. Yeah, well, let's be suspicious of the hermeneutic of suspicion and all those clowns.
Yeah, Steinmetz used to say that. Once you turn it around, it becomes becomes
pretty evident.
Yeah, and that's and I think that's what Glenn was doing, in mentioning the history. When you start to turn it around, if you're going to play the game, you can unpack a lot of things there. But that does, raise another question. This is one of the things I think, especially in the climate we are now, is this thinness of reality's complexity. Because there is, and this is what all the critical theorists and everyone else, there are places at which human beings, structures, everything else, have sin ingredients and they get advantages of. On the other hand, if we say everything is that, we end up with the problem we have now, which is any suggestion otherwise is automatically considered suspect, and therefore no actual ability to bring out the complexity which is necessary for any genuine engagement with the reality.
Or to even just move ahead.
Yeah, well, that's it.
And to actually commune with people.
Yeah.
What these people have given us is a world of isolated monads. I mean, there is no genuine communion.
Yeah. Well, and this also, I think, feeds into the entire idea of microaggressions.
Yep.
And all of the things related to it, because the assumption is that somewhere behind what you're saying or doing, there's racial animus in place. And even if you're not aware of it, even if you're not conscious of it, it's coming out in what you're saying. And I can recognize it, even if you can't.
And there is this kind of, the ones making the claim are self-righteous and not guilty of it. Everyone else is absolutely depraved. So you have this kind of Gnostic, elect, non-elect, woke, unwoke.
Right.
Worse than Augustine when you're talking about elect and reprobate.
Vodi Bakum actually calls it ethnic Gnosticism.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, give him credit. Yeah, Vodi's good. Yeah.
Vodi's really good.
Yeah. But I mean, it's exactly what you get, and yet you know, contra Augustine, you have nothing justifying it other than just curious whims. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and there's really no way out. You know, if we take critical theory and apply it sort of evenly, what we come away with is everybody's out to get me, and nothing can be trusted.
Yeah.
Nothing that anyone says can be trusted. I have to be. Not only am I like Eve, doubting God, I'm doubting everyone. I'm doubting Glenn. I'm doubting Lynn. I'm doubting Tom. I'm doubting. Why should I even trust myself?
Yeah, and the only people, that are trusted are supposedly within one's, kind of group. But even there, you start to see, as this Theory's Empire talks about, the kind of, when you look at the departments that...
they're petty. They're petty.
Yeah, they're petty, and they're the wars that go on for funding. So
it's amazing that anything gets done in this country.
It is.
When I have people I've known that have worked for NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and the stuff they've told me about sabotage between respected health authorities just undermining each other's work so that they could get more money for their own programs.
And spread it out to the identities, and that's when you get the competition. So you don't get the unity. No. I mean, this is one of the other things about a hermeneutic of suspicion, or, of sympathy, or I had a professor, Nicholas Lash, used to call it hermeneutic of charity, in which you generously recognize the imago Dei, even in its brokenness, but also in its dignity in everyone, everything. So that you're not naive, but on the other hand, you don't receive the genuine gift character. I mean, God doesn't destroy everyone after Adam and Eve.
Right.
Otherwise, if you're
if
saying
Freud was right, if all those other guys are right, then God would have.
That's right. They would have. There is nothing there. So nothing at all is of anything. And I think you could find some hyper reform folk in that category.
Well, I've run across those folks.
Rush Dooney. Sorry.
One of the things to remember is that, with only a few exceptions, revolutions tend to eat their young.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Actually, revolutionaries tend to eat each other. And that's what you're seeing here with all this.
Oh yeah, Cuomo.
So they're not suspicious when it comes down to devouring it. No, just.
Well, and this is something
actually, even among the revolutionaries, the hermeneutics of suspicion is applied to each other, and that's where you get this tendency for revolutions revolutionaries to kill each other.
Well, and if power is the summum bonum, then doesn't it make sense? I mean, you're almost under Damocles' sword if you have power. and you are after it.
Yeah, it's no
If you
win.
don't.
It's a no-win situation. I mean, it's just a matter of time before you're going to be done in by somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a thin gruel that we're given to eat.
Yeah.
And again, getting back to just practical sort of considerations, I think one of the reasons why this stuff is capable or able to capture, sort of attention and the imagination is just because we have so much comfort and we have such a large amount of social capital to kind of live off of.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this the other day, thinking about Carl Sagan, the pop scientist, atheist dude who is well known for his series Cosmos back in the 80s. Sagan was famous for saying to his listeners, "You are stardust," with this sort of, tone that this is something that should make you think very highly of yourself. Well, so are frogs and rocks.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing that always got me about the sort of pantheism of the New Age movement. People. You got Shirley MacLaine running down the beach yelling, "I am God," but then again, so is Pond Scum.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
You've got to have some sense of hierarchy and some sense of layering for there to be a sense of self-worth in saying something like that about yourself.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I'm getting at here is that these people have to cheat. So Sagan is cheating at that moment when he's essentially sort of siphoning off from the riches of the Christian faith. The notion that being a heavenly being is something important and beautiful and significant.
And that our end is, in the West, glorification, in the East, deification, this
Right.
notion of being in union with God and in the image of Christ.
And I guess this gets back to what you were saying about being suspicious of the suspicious, in the sense that they're up to things, and the reason why their rhetoric has power is because they're lying. They're using the resources of our tradition against itself, and we ought to call them out on that.
Yeah.
And we ought to not just do that. And this is where it's tricky. This is where it's very tricky. We ought to even read those guys sympathetically.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this is something. Yeah, this is where kind of some of our audience may, shut their pod off. I don't even know what they're listening on.
Well, you should actually listen to us sympathetically too.
That's right. We should.
Well, we should listen to Glenn sympathetically, but
just as Michel Foucault, who I detest morally,
right.
but as someone who's contributed to the current situation more than at this point, most people our audience is listening to. We need to understand it, but we need to understand it in a way. And I think something Glenn was saying a while back that I think needs to be tied to it. The best way to engage all of this stuff, because again, it's largely on the level of rhetoric and it's largely on the level of power and psychology, but it's to or use old language, out narrate them. Christianity has the riches that address every single one of the issues that even Foucault was up to. He was up to some kind of way of fulfillment and happiness. He was looking in the wrong place.
Yeah.
But he still had this fascination with Christianity itself, where he read it. He didn't read it sympathetically, although sometimes I think he was jealous of it, like Nietzsche was of Christianity.
Right.
And he couldn't shake it. I mean, in one article I just read on Foucault said he could never shake the Christian vision.
Yeah.
And he thought the whole West was basically Augustinian. So that's more credit to Western theology than most would give. And I don't think he meant that as a good thing. It doesn't matter. I think he read something in a way that he got something that I think most people today wouldn't have looked at and taken seriously. Even Christians in seminary, how many people are actually reading the church fathers and reading them even in such a way to show that they have impacted the West? None.
Yeah, well, that's right. Of course, that's what, a number of people in more recent times have been, sort of telling us we need to do more.
Read our roots,
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, we should probably wrap this up for different reasons.
None of which you need to be suspicious of.
That's right. It's just I kind of need to get home. Is that practical?
Yeah.
And we are getting close to the time. Anything you guys want to say as we wrap up?
No, I just want to repeat my golden rule comment because that's something that we regularly overlook. We tend to expect the worst motives for the people who oppose us and assume the best motives for ourselves and people on our side. And that is simply, not biblical ethics.
Right.
So my message to the left from that is don't trust your allies. Anyway.
Well, yeah, actually right. I mean, if you're going to consistently apply your principle
That's
That's right. Anyway, we really do appreciate our listeners. I've said this a few times recently. One of the things that people do that really does help us is give us a good rating on the platform that they listen to us on. I think we're up to almost 160 reviews on iTunes.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it'd be great to get that up to 200-ish. So if you like us, go ahead and rate us. If you don't, why did you listen this long? Yes.
You can write that if you want.
Well, there have been a few people who have done that. Although we do have a 5-star rating, but there are, a very few very bitter people who don't like us.
Well, just remember, if anybody agrees with you on everything, one of you is unnecessary.
That's right. Well, anyway, so we're glad for that. We're also glad for people who send us money. We don't ask for it very often, and people spontaneously do it. And we get these gifts, and we're very grateful. Sometimes people give to us through the Fight, Laugh, Feast network. Sometimes they give to us through the platform that they listen on. And sometimes people just go to our website, thetheologypugcast.com, and just give us some money that way, because there is a way to do that there. So all those gifts do help to fray the cost of producing the show, and they are much appreciated. Anyway, I think that's enough for now. I got to get home, and I got to get ready to fly back to the Pacific Northwest. So, we've recorded a series of shows here that should take us through April, and we might need to do some Zoom shows in May, but I'll be back. I'll be back. And because I do own a house, actually own a few properties here in this part of the world, and I do need to get back every once in a while. So we're going to be live and together again.
Good.
But thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.